Today we're extending the topic that we've been covering about colour and tone. And last week and the week before, we looked at how to adjust individual tones and colours within our images. Last week we looked at the overall colour of our images when we looked at white balance. And today we're going to have a look at what impact colour has on the narrative and story of our photographs. And last year when we were discussing what makes an engaging image and were exploring the composition within an image, two of the aspects that made an engaging image were its aesthetics and its emotive narrative. And both those things hold us in an image. The aesthetic we find as beautiful, and the emotive narrative is that emotional tug that the story in the image gives us. And I know for a lot of you, you were wanting a more objective story in terms of, well, like, I took a photo of a nice flower, I love the image, but it's got no story. And that story can sometimes be very subtle, and it's often communicated by the colour and tone of the image, and we actually appreciate it on a more psychological level than an intellectual level. So today we're going to have a look at how colours within an image actually contribute to the overall narrative and the aesthetics, and communicate information to the viewer that communication is subconscious. You don't realise that the colours in the photograph are actually talking to you. And the other thing is, if you are trying to proactively create a narrative around an image and convey a meaning to the viewer, you need to be very conscious about the colours that you use within the image. The colours of the person's clothing, the background, the whole environment may in fact not communicate what you're trying to communicate. And within marketing, it's a very important aspect of communication, that psychological, subconscious communication, and corporate branding uses that psychology all the time. They are very, very careful about the colours that they use in their brand, because they know those colours have a psychological communication with the viewer, and they want that psychological, subconscious communication to be what they want their brand portrayed at. So we're just going to quickly have a look at some of those colours and the branding and the companies that use those colours, and what those colours mean to us subconsciously when we're understanding the story of an image. So red is something, it is very strong and exciting, and it's often used for sexual connotations and a dynamic image. It's not one that's calm. And even in nature, and the reason why this is because in nature red means danger. So when you have dangerous plants and dangerous animals, and particularly insects, they often have red on them. And that's snakes the same. Red-bellied snakes, don't go near it, very dangerous. So we know instinctively red means danger, and so we respond to it accordingly with adrenaline when we see red in photographs. So be aware, if you are trying to create something that's calming and soothing, and you're going to put this image in a room like a bedroom, don't make a red one. Orange is a much more flamboyant colour. It's not dangerous like red, but it's flamboyant, and it means youthfulness and confidence and enthusiasm. And it's something that we don't use lightly in our clothing or our decoration, because we know it is very, very strong in its communication. Yellow is a softer form of orange, and it's something that we don't use very much. We've really used it as a colour really since the 50s and 60s. But it has got that the feeling of nature and joy and exuberance, and it's quite uplifting as a colour. And so again, if you're thinking of having a photograph that you're going to have in your family room or something like that, this is a colour that is joyful. It's a sunshine colour, and probably it's because it is sunshine that we do feel uplifted by yellow. And you'll see the branding that the companies that have used yellow in their branding want you to feel comfortable and happy. It sometimes can be used as a warning colour, and in nature, things that are yellow are not going to so much bite you, or they're not toxic, but they're keep away as well. It's a warning colour, and it's what we use in our warning signs. And you know, the red stop sign and the yellow warning sign aren't there by chance. They're because instinctively we respond to those colours to be aware, immediately aware of these colours. And that's what our brain tells us. And so when you're constructing your images, be aware that that is an important communication. Green is the colour of nature, and we always find green very calming and stabilising. When I know I find comfort from green. I love plants around me because it makes me feel comfortable, balanced, at harmony with nature. And so again, if you've got a room that you're wanting to put one of your photographs in, and you know, like a bedroom, then green is a lovely colour. And it communicates that, you know, that feeling of nature and renewal and freshness. Blue's an interesting colour. It's the colour of sky and blue skies. And again, I think that's the psychology behind the serenity and the peace and the stability that blue skies give us. And blue skies is a euphemism for good times, for calm times. And when we have blue in an image, it immediately communicates to us that calmness. And it's my favourite colour, and I love blues in images. They really convey that feeling. Pink is an interesting colour in that it has a whole lot of connotations around pink. It implies femininity, and in some cases that's almost a negativity. And it's just, I think, the way anything that is feminine is not considered to be as strong as anything that is not feminine. But it does imply compassion and love and softness and kindness, which are considered to be feminine attributes. So it's interesting that the softness that images relay to us when they're pink. Purple has always traditionally been a royal colour and indicates wealth. And traditionally, purple was a very expensive dye, and they could only get it out of a particular type of shell to dye fabrics, and that's why it was considered only a regal colour. But it does have a sophistication around it. It can be tawdry, but it tends to be a very sophisticated feel that it gives something. Browns are earthy and natural and simplistic and organic, and probably a sort of more male colour. It's dependable and rugged, and that's what the images convey when we, you know, that's the story behind them. So though the dead fern leaves on the right, you wouldn't say they had a story, but they convey all of that in terms of our psychological communication with them. And black is a very formal colour. It was something that was only ever used in mourning, and particularly for clothes, and was to convey that grief and seriousness around, and drama around mourning. And we don't feel uplifted by black. it's a much more serious colour. And so again, if we're going to be having a lot of black in our image, we will be putting mystery in it and a seriousness to that image. So that I had never really understood how much our mood is impacted by the colours that surround us. But the more that I've become aware of it, the more that I realise how much colour actually influences our psyche. So because it has that influence, it's that capability to communicate a story to us. And I think the other thing that's really interesting, if you are trying to create an image, perhaps a still life or a portrait, and you want for that image to be consistent with that feeling that you're trying to give it, whether it be old worldly or something from the past or something from the future, you need to be very aware of the colours that you actually use, the colours and patterns within the props and the subject that you have within your image, because colours indicate eras. And this is something that also came to me when I was trying to create still life in photography, was that you had to be very aware of the colours of the period to convey that period. But the reverse of that is colours actually had a psyche around them that was very reflective of the period that they were in. And so it's like a two-way thing, that the colours that we choose in our current era in time for our clothing, for our decoration, very much reflect the psychology and the social feeling of the time. So the social feeling of the Victorian exuberance was very much of wealth. And so the patterns and the colours they used, if you go into a heritage house that was decorated in the Victorian era, you see the overabundance of colour and pattern, because that was the feeling of the time. After the Victorian era came the 20s, which was after the First World War, which there was a massive level of mortality across the world, and also the Spanish flu. And people wanted to introduce a feeling of peace and calm and elegance that wasn't that over-the-top pre-war classy, expensive elegance. It was a simple type of elegance, and they used a lot of blues in the 20s because it was a very peaceful colour. The 30s had much more sombre colours. You look at anything in the 30s, then they're maroons and olive greens and browns, and they also had very simplistic shapes, and that's when the Deco period came in, of very geometric sort of stability, other than the flourishes that the Victorian period had. The 40s, the wartime period, again, when cinematographers are trying to portray wartime, they tend to have all of their sets and all of their props of the colours of the period, which were olive greens and browns, because that was what the uniform colours were, and that's what the feeling of the times were those very muted sort of colours. And then in the 50s, we reacted against that, and it was the homecoming time where people went back to the farm, back to home. And home in those times was the colour of nature, the colour of sunshine and the colour of green. And we had that very peculiar kitchen green and egg gold yellow was of that period. The 60s was the technology period where we explored science, and it was a very brave period where we flew to the moon. And the colours of that period, the 60s, are very, very bold, geometric shapes. And that was, the time of the psychedelia, disco and colours. It was very bold colours and geometric colours. The 70s was the anti-war period where we went back to macrame and weaving and nature and the environment. And we had the colours of the harvest gold, the avocado green, the pumpkin orange. They were very nature oriented colours. They were bold in that the baby boomers were reactionary, but they were very much about the environment. The 80s was the over the top, and apparently in this era is where they actually discovered they could get fluoro dyes. And prior to that period, we didn't have that technology capability of fluoro colours in our dyes. And this is when the parachute silk and everything came in of these bright pinks and bright greens and bright oranges. It's a very exuberant era, and that's when we had our stock exchange crash. And then in the early 90s, we went back to reality and moved away from that, the exuberance of the disco 80s, back into the sage greens and the peaches. And you can tell, you know, when a house was decorated by the era, and the colours are very much associated with that era. So very strong communication to the user if you use those colours. Now, what when I was exploring all these colours and what they communicated, it really makes me wonder what is being communicated about our psychology since the 2000s. Because I've been really looking at colour since that period, and there is none. There's no colours in cars, there's no colours in houses, and there's no colours in clothes. We just do black and white. Black and white and grey, sometimes a bit of taupe, and occasionally a touch of red. That's it. And what does it say about us? You know, you can't, in fact, the last 2 decades have almost been the same. So that's sort of worries me a little bit about our psychology. But that's what I want to leave with you today, was really thinking about colour when you're composing your photographs. If you're trying to tell somebody something about a place, try and get the colours in the background and the subject that add to that narrative. So next time you're shooting and want to convey that feeling of the space, think about how to optimise those colours and patterns to give the viewer the same feeling. Just as a practice for yourself, if you are practicing your photography, think about a feeling or a narrative or an era that you want to convey, and try and put the props and colours within your image to give that particular feel. And I'd love to see what you've done. So I hope that's opened your idea or opened your mind to how important colour is in our photographs for communicating that story. So thank you.